So I'm here with Jessica NATHANSON
Hello.
from Israel, and we've just had a really enjoyable conversation about non-duality and uniduality. And now we're back, but this time with biscuits.
And nuts.
And nuts. To just pick over that conversation and see if there's anything more we want to add. And one of the things that came up for me, I thought it was going to be, there was a part of me I think was heading towards it as the end of the conversation, and then there came a moment where our eyes kind of met and it got so...
We dissolved into the big love.
It was very deep, and suddenly the conversation was, oh, I think we've done, and that felt right. And this would have been maybe a too negative a thought to go to. But I wanted to be critical. I've talked about Ramesh Balsekar being one of the teachers that introduced me to the non-dual vision, and how it seemed positive and then became negative and wanting to find a both and vision. And one of the books that I bought, well, interestingly, I'm just thinking about this right now, Jessica. It was actually two books. I read lots of his books. One of them, interestingly, was called Duet for One, which is exactly what I'm saying.
Exactly. Very
even
well
though
said.
I didn't feel like Ramesh was really saying that.
Duet for One.
But that's Duet for One.
It's beautiful.
Is a beautiful poetic version of it. It was his translation of one of the Gitas, the non-dual Gitas, and it was beautiful. And then the other one, the title of the other one, was The Final Truth. And really how, and I read it and I found it very interesting. But I look back now and I think all I know about myself, that why my detector of crazy bullshit wasn't going, do, this guy's, you really? And there's something about that which seems central to this as well.
I think so.
And it's because it's defining the truth as a negative. You said this. It's a non-truth.
Right.
So once you've seen through the self and the illusion of separateness, that's it.
There's nothing to do.
There's nothing to do.
There's a non-teaching.
There's no one to go there and done. Yeah. You're done. And that's the final truth. And that feels a million miles away from where I am now, which is, well, first of all, the truth is not a thing which you find. The truth is a trustworthy belief. And that trustworthiness is relative to your purposes, to your evolution.
Yeah.
What seems trustworthy now may become untrustworthy later. And when you discover more, it's an evolving thing. So it's not like the truth, which is final. But instead, this much more optimistic thing where you're expanding. And when I look at humanity, look at how we've expanded our understanding. And that feels like what spirituality needs to catch up with. It needs to get that evolutionary insight.
Yeah.
And then take all of the wonderful states it's been exploring and understand them in that way. No final truth.
No, that's amazing. There's something, firstly, very kind of cold about that, the final truth, right? It makes me think of the final solution.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned this.
Continuing on with my sort of dark metaphors here, but I'm trying to do it in jest.
You said this earlier, and I loved it because it's very dark, and you can say it. But and what made me, why it's funny, is because there's a kind of truth in it that it's the eradication of
and
all the selves.
Yeah, and it really is only really meant to describe the most extreme, I think. Because actually, I didn't mention this before, and it frightens me to even say this. One of the books that I had read on my Kindle a few years after my big awakening was called I Hope You Die Soon.
I've heard of
a Neo-Advaita book by, I don't know, somebody Sylvester or something.
Oh, I know him.
Richard,
yes.
maybe?
Richard Sylvester.
Oh, God.
Yes,
and I don't dare open the book again. I'm afraid that I'll start crying or something. But the other one is, and I can't remember his name, but he's a YouTuber who does a lot of Neo-Advaita stuff. And his weekly talk is called Come Die With Me. It's a culture of death. And that's when I said the sort of suicide cult. It really is. There was that actual suicide cult, right? Where they were all taught to, they committed suicide together.
There's been a few, but I don't know which ones.
Okay, so this was sort of like a spiritual suicide club.
Right.
I think it's a perfect metaphor because I really did go that hardcore. So I do think it's important to say it that way. The final solution, the final, what was it?
Truth.
The final truth. And I really like what you've opened me up to is this vision of potential, and how that path is really the end of human potential, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's nowhere left to go. There's nothing
Yeah.
to do. There's maybe something peaceful about that at a certain point when you're really tired and you've run yourself ragged from this whole human thing. But then it just stops there. And aren't we more interested in flourishing? I think human flourishing is what I'm really curious about. How can we use non-duality, and I'm going to say uniduality because I don't think non-duality fits it, to lead to human flourishing. And you said that the universe is, I think, blossoming into God.
Yeah, flowering, blossoming into God. That's another image which we didn't get into in the conversation about
I love that.
non-duality, which is the idea that there's an awful lot in the... Actually, no, I actually think I'm open to the possibility that it's actually a reflection of the actual evolutionary process itself. That at a certain point, around the Axle Age, 500 BC or something like that, where a lot of these traditions start, and you get all of these figures, often mythological figures, semi-historical, something, where people are glimpsing these non-dual or oneness states as an escape.
Yeah.
And then later you get, for instance, one example, a big one obviously, is the Christianity. So 500 years later, maybe. So from 500 BC, to up to 0, as we call it. What you arrives then is a whole new idea, where you've got the idea of a God, a oneness, which is a being of love. I mean, actually, you get that statement. I mean, there's in the letter of John, God is love, and those that live in God live in love, and God lives in them. I mean, amazing statement. That's a whole new thing. And you've gone from the idea of deities as like tribal gods, thunder gods, all this sort of thing in conflict. Not certainly not loving and not trustworthy.
Not so much.
Not people you kind of go, they may help you. They're like the forces of nature. They feed you, but they may kill you.
Exactly.
You know what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And then you've got this kind of love. And if you look at the mystical literature, you've got these two traditions. One is kind of, look, it's all horrible, dissolve back into the primal emptiness.
Yes.
And then you've got this new tradition, which is like, no, move forward into this emergent love, serve, bring the love into the world. It will be, I mean, it's also originally very world denying, but it will become more world enhancing.
Right.
So I love that idea, and the idea that what we're waking up to is in fact a higher level of emergence than we are. And the thing that really moves me is the idea that actually that is arising through us waking up.
Right.
That as we wake up into oneness, this
exactly.
unitary soul, which you could call God, well, it's a very different version of God, because it's not God at the beginning, it's God which is arising. Pierre Terre de Chardin has this.
I never knew how to pronounce that name, thank you.
Yeah, he has a kind of different way of saying it, but essentially it's the same thing. It's like this idea of, and then you've got a completely different vision, because it's not, it feels like there's a theory, there's that kind of it's all fucked up theory, which is we've got into this confusion, God's
put an
fallen
end to
into this, get back to how it was originally, dissolve back into the ocean of emptiness, and it'll all be much better for it because you've been a bit, the whole thing's been a mistake, you've been a mistake. versus no, it's all flowering into something so beautiful you can't imagine.
And if you don't like where it's gone or where it's going, we can change it, but we need to emerge to this unividual level.
Yeah,
and that's where the
that's
possibilities
the key,
open.
That and that's where it has meaning.
Yeah,
because it goes, look, we are part of that process, and the idea, the idea I want to put out and let people contemplate is the idea that presence that we can experience as God, that thing which is greater than us, which is so benign and benevolent. Is actually made of us. It is like my body is made of all these individual cells.
Yeah.
It's a combination, a communion of all these individual psyches or souls. And then suddenly you have a very different version.
It's night and day.
It is, isn't it? And so the unidual evolution arrives into this coming together, this both and coming together of the conscious oneness.
Yeah, that's where the optimism comes in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So was there anything else which struck you in what we were exploring and just wandering around in? Those are two big ideas that came up.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things. And I don't think there's anything else specific.
Good.
I'm sure tons of things will bubble up later when I'm not in front of you, but...
Yeah, good. Well, I really think it was good to come back and pick up those two things. One is, the idea that there's some final truth, and the opposite of that, which is their continual emergence.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the ways that those two things come together, and the idea that that emergence may be the universe flowering into God rather than having come from God, where those two things fit together for me is that you cannot arrive even at a final representation of truth if the very thing you're representing is always more.
Can you say that again?
You can't arrive, even if you take a rather clumsy version of truth that you're kind of representing reality accurately, which I don't think is quite right, really. But if you have that view, if the thing you're representing is continually becoming more, if you had to describe the whole universe, say you could, I mean obviously you can't, but say you could represent everything as it is, the soon as you'd said it, it's all changed. It's all become more than.
Right.
And if in that process of emergence, sometimes there's massive emergent jumps, you can't ever contain it.
So it's always moving.
It's moving.
You can't capture it
and more than, and more than,
always
and more than.
Every second.
So that, literally every second. So all of those old-fashioned ideas of truth, I think we need to abandon them.
Yeah, that makes sense to
and
me.
actually go, look, what we're looking for is understandings which are trustworthy to help us navigate what is a very complex thing. Another great thing, going on again, but another thing which is very attractive about non-duality, and the reason that we went from, when I was interested in non-duality, I had to go to India. There was no non-dual teachers, really, a handful. They weren't very famous, I didn't know them. And then suddenly there was like a non-dual teacher on every street corner.
Exactly.
It was like, everyone was a non-dual teacher, because it had an incredible simplicity to it, very attractive. All you've got to realise is there's no self, there's no doer, whatever the particular line is, and you're there.
Right.
You got it. Just enter that state. And, and you've arrived. Or if you haven't, and you can teach other people, because it's that. The difference between that and no, we live in an immensely complex in which different people need to understand different elements of reality because it's so vast and complex. And then we have to live in it. We have to live with biology. We have to live with psychology. We have to live with each other. We have to live with each other on different levels. Exactly. Some of whom are very awake and loving and caring, and some are not.
Exactly.
And dangerous. And still living in the Middle Ages. And that we need the wisdom to navigate all of that with love or benevolence.
Right.
That's a huge undertaking.
It's a huge undertaking.
And, there's no end in sight to how much wisdom we can gain on that.
And you have to choose to commit to that.
Yeah. And then so the whole idea of this kind of spiritually naive nihilism.
Nihilism is what it is.
Becomes, I want to say, slightly ridiculous.
It's very immature. It's almost teenager-ish.
And then, did you have it when I had it? It wasn't very long for me, but what I did notice was I went through this phase that I see happen a lot. Tell me if you had it, and I will I will confess to it. It's like I felt like, this is the real thing, and all of those other poor benighted souls are working on themselves.
Oh my God!
And doing psychological work and all of that nonsense. It just drops away because you just suddenly realise it's just this. You just get this. And all of that is like so kindergarten. But I've got this.
I'm so happy you said that, because that is actually a thread that's very important to me, because I want to kind of move into psychology and also help people understand why this path is so unhealthy, is that it tries to negate the validity, not just of psychology and psychotherapy, but it actually pathologizes the Western notion of what is mental health. So it pathologizes mental health from a psychological level and then presents itself as, let's say, spiritually healthy, and pits that against let's say, sort of common sense psychological health.
Yeah.
And there's something obviously very damaging about that. So
Yeah.
you have people that need therapy, for example, who go to these non-dual sort of communities and say, oh, science is just an illusion. And they say any attempt to work on yourself or change yourself or develop yourself is basically a fool's errand. Like, you're laughed at because that self that you're working on is just an illusion. Ha 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 ha. You know, it's
Changing deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yes, my dad always used to say that. But that's exactly, an exercise in futility.
Futility.
And it was very funny too, right? So we could laugh at those people.
Yeah.
But then what are they doing? They're essentially just giving you, the 5 steps to this instant enlightenment.
Yeah.
And it's still the ego trying to better its own experience by getting rid of itself.
Exactly.
But it's a very problematic.
Yeah. So one of the things I see with having run events with people, going deep into all this stuff for whatever it is now, 20-something years, I really get it now. I've had to learn it, but I really get it, is that we are so unique. And for one person, it really is, look, loosen up around yourself.
Yeah.
Stop being so obsessed with your success or your physical life, or
Right.
just open up to a possibility of something far less tangible than that, that may be of interest. But sitting next to them can be somebody that you want to go, you're in danger of drifting off, and possibly even drifting off into the oneness. You just root yourself in your body.
Exactly.
And feel your individuality and build a strong foundation before you go there, because you could enter states you don't want to enter if you do that.
That's very true. It's very much about sort of, let's say, swallowing a stick of dynamite, so the whole structure just falls apart. But I think there's this quote that's amazing that said, some neo-Advaitins appear like a demolition crew coming and toppling down all the beautiful buildings in the neighborhood and then standing triumphantly saying, aha! And it's really what they're doing.
These are another delightfully funny dark image. Yeah.
But it is. It's just about destruction.
Carl Jung, who came up in our conversation, I think, but he's always Uncle Carl. He's always floating about. He's a lovely man. I like him. He had this thing where I forget where he said it, but he talked about sometimes certain forms of mental illness that he was dealing with as failed initiations.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting, because if you go into these, if you have a strong self to have as a foundation and you can go up from, as it were, you will get initiated into these other higher levels and it will be healthy.
Right, exactly.
You won't be perfect.
No.
But you'll be healthy. And if you haven't, then you can be in trouble.
That's exactly right. Because
it can't support it, and then it's a failed initiation.
And that's where I get very angry, I think, with these sort of, instant enlightenment teachers, is they're giving a blanket prescription, and they're saying that, ego death or dissolution of the self is the prescription for everyone at every age, at every stage in their life, with no sort of background or differentiation into, who these people are, or where they're at in their life stage. And it can either be a completely, psychologically ruining experience, or it can enhance it, as we're talking about. But it's very shifty, and one has to be very, very careful.
And on lots of levels, really. I mean, I guess maybe it's no more different than whatever you pay attention to flourishes and what you don't pay attention to doesn't. But I mean, I think back on my life, when people go, "What's your story?" and I go, "Well, I had an awakening when I was 12, and off I went on this journey." And, "Oh, really? It starts so young for you. You're so lucky." And I was lucky, and it was great, and it's made me Tim, and I'm very, very grateful. But it meant I didn't come into the world at all. Like mentors for me, like Ram Dass, he was a professor at Harvard.
That's right. That's right.
So he went on as a professor at Harvard. I was a young guy. So I never had that, I engaged with the world much later when I had a family and became a professional writer and found a way into the world, and I'm the most in I've ever been, and I'm glad. But it all was an illusion and of no value.
You were never born, and
you
never died.
One of the big things that comes with that is that sense of that, if I was a real A-lister seeker, I'd be a monk.
Right.
So I was constantly vacillating between being a monk and not,
Yeah.
because that was the true thing. That was the only thing that really mattered. And
Right.
it was my ego trips that took me into everything else.
Exactly. I think you also mentioned one of our friends in the retreat was talking about how, but the ego can be such a bastard, and it's true. But you were making that differentiation between that and sort of egotism. I think the point that I was trying to make was, I guess, that whole sort of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Is that, okay, there's something that maybe it's broken. Do you just throw it out, or do you fix it, or do you try to repair it or heal it?
Yeah, exactly.
But then the story is, well, you can't fix something that never existed in the first place. And then you get into that whole sort of like...
Well, I think that's where we started the conversation. Our first conversation was that, like, what is the self that's being denied?
Yeah.
Because there is a body, there is a psyche, there is thinking going on, there's choices being made. I think they'd all agree with that, in that there is some flow of something. Ramesh would, I think he'd just go, it's all just happening. And it's like, well, okay, well, that's it. It is, what you're saying is just happening, is an aspect of the universe doing its thing. It's just that aspect is you. You're that perspective on the universe. That's what makes you an individual. So the identity question becomes huge. That's one of the things I'm really pleased with this whole unividualism philosophy, is that in spirituality generally, in fact most things, I see very few or none really good theories of identity. But if you understand that the past accumulates, and that everything is made, that what comes into form is in form, and that the universe is learning through that how to be everything, and that what enables me to do all of this is my past. So I know these words because of my past. I move like this because of the past. Like everything is being run by the past. It hasn't gone anywhere. Then who am I? Well, I'm the past. Everything is. What's the universe? It's its past. What's Jessica? You're everything that Jessica has done, seen, been. That's what you are. You know
what's so interesting about that is it's such the opposite, because the story that I ingested so often was your history is an illusion, right?
Yeah.
Your history isn't real. You're not your history. You're not your story.
Well, it's not here, is it? It's gone. Well, has it? If it had gone, how the hell would you know the meaning of these funny sounds?
Yeah.
It clearly hasn't gone.
And I think you once likened this a bit to dementia. Where you have the same description can apply to states like depersonalization, even Alzheimer's. If it's great to not be completely caught up in your history. You want that balance, but
it's great to not feel that there's only your history repeating, because you're losing the most important thing, but it's also creative.
Yeah.
So your history can become something new, and in time, something quite unrecognizable. To what you were before.
And so you're redeeming your history.
So as you arrive, well, that's already happened, isn't it? I mean, if we, I'm sure if you compared both of us to what we were like when we were 5, you go, wow, you're quite different now, aren't you?
Probably.
But because not, certainly as a body, let alone anything else. So it's creative. It's changing, and then you make choices and you change. So it's not like you're your past, get used to it. It's like you're your past. That's what you've got to work with. That's you are, and when I say you're your past, you are. It's not like you're this strand. You are always this individual system in relationship with the whole.
Right.
So your past is the past of that relationship. That's what makes you you. You're never a little cut off thing.
Yeah.
You're always the whole.
It's a little hard to understand, I think, at first.
Yeah, it is, because it's a new way of thinking.
Yeah.
But it enables you to then go, so then you get to the problem of who is making the choices. Well, the pastivity, the past system. It's not, and what are you? Well, you're that system. So the idea that you're this free-floating thing with no identity, or you're an essence of consciousness or something, it's like, what does that even mean?
Oh, exactly.
And then you've got an idea of, that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Well, that's nonsense. But what does exist is an aspect of the one which is relating to itself, and you're that.
Yeah.
And suddenly all the things we've said, you're ended up with this optimistic.
Can we talk for a moment about conscious evolution and unconscious evolution?
Okay.
Because I think that is where there's so much optimism and empowerment and hope, in terms of once you, let's say, wake up to unividuality and that experience, you then recognize that, let's say, you've called like the self-realizing universe.
Yeah.
And the moment that through my eyes or through your eyes, you see yourself manifested as me, and evolution then can become a conscious rather than an unconscious process.
Yes.
So I see that on that collective level of, let's say, evolution of existence. But in one's own story, you then have that power to consciously create your life, because you're no longer unconsciously creating your life and just sort of at the sort of whim of the habitual self. You now can kind of take control of the reins and choose to steer a different course.
Yeah.
But that, I know that fits into your philosophy in a bigger way, so maybe you could...
Well, it's like seeing... The ability to make a conscious choice was a huge, honestly, a huge jump in our evolution. It's why we've evolved so quickly.
Yeah.
Because we don't have to... Because if you look at most of nature, it just does something, and then if it works, it carries on. If it doesn't work, it dies. Whereas we can imagine, should we go there hunting or there hunting? We can work it out. And that's evolved into this level of philosophy. But what's interesting about that is it slows everything down. If you can function without doing it, it takes up much less energy, it's much quicker.
Yeah.
It's a very costly on energy and time to just go, ooh, should it? And that's why when you say, I'll have to think about it, let me sleep on it.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't act right now. I've got to take time, it's going to take energy, I've got to come back, got to look at it from different angles. So in one way, it's very unproductive. But the overall effect is you can actually work out the ramifications as best you can of acting before you act. And that means you can now evolve.
Acting before you act.
Yeah. You can imagine it.
Yeah.
And therefore you can do the one that you think you can, which may be best based on your past. Now, when you're doing that with yourself, you can now look at the system, how you're processing the system, how you're working. And rather than just letting it function unconsciously, which is less costly on energy and time, you can focus on yourself. So if you want to change yourself and you want to change your life, you've got to stop.
Yeah.
Take some time. Have a look.
Right.
And it's costly on time and energy.
Yeah.
But that means you can reset. It's a bit like, I always think like the computer, it's like, I hate it, don't you, when you get a new operating system and you go, oh no, but it's going to be worth it.
Exactly.
And you're going to download the new operating system and you wait and wait and wait. I want to get on. Wait. Oh, no, that doesn't work. Now I've got to go and download that one because it's a new operating system. But when you've done it, now we're rolling. And it's like that. It's like the conscious changing the self. It's like that. You work out, you change the operating system, and it's costly, and but when you've done it, now you're functioning.
Right.
Until the next one's available. Yeah. And then it's like, I need to update again. And then off you go.
One last thing.
Okay.
Unless there's other things. Responsibility.
Okay.
That's something that really intrigues me, and I think it came up in one of our... one of the ICU meetups with eye gazing, where someone said, they really felt the unividuality, but something that came up for them was this sense of responsibility. That now that I experience myself as a unividual with everyone, I now have this immense sense of responsibility that I have to step into, and I have to choose that. And there is some kind of relinquishment of responsibility that I think some of the those more like modern non-dual teachings have built into them. Is sort of like you're no longer responsible.
Not some. Total.
I know. I think I try to be a little bit too
soft,
spiritually correct, if you will.
Yeah. No, I mean that's one of the attractions, isn't it?
That's what I wanted to talk about.
Ramesh said it to me clearly. It's like there's no good and bad.
Right.
There's no one to blame. There's no one to praise.
Yeah.
There's no one. So you're not to blame. You're not to praise. It's like so you don't get all the good bits. You don't get the bad bits. And with this. It's the opposite. You see, when I've looked at my experience and gone, well, how would I describe a unividual morality?
Yeah.
It's, there's universal benevolence, because you come into that relationship of oneness and love. So it's a wishing well to everything, which is a very general thing. But then it applies in my life. So that's very specific. So it's universal benevolence and individual responsibility. Like I'm responsible for my individual relationships with the one. Right. Which means my children, my friends, my wife, my parents, my job, my talents, and so and that I think is responsibility. You know? And interesting though, I'm just thinking this as we're talking. The word. We've been talking about relationship as opposed to sort of a bland oneness, the idea of everything being relationship. Well, responsibility is about responding. That's what the word comes from.
Right.
It's like you have to respond to the universe as you experience it.
Yeah.
And you can't control the universe, but you can have some about how you respond, and that's responsibility.
And there's something empowering about that.
Oh, massive.
But there also, I feel like you could see it as a burden, right? That, okay, now I'm responsible. What I do reflects on everyone else, which at the deepest level is true.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it can give you purpose and meaning to say, okay, if I make these changes, then I'm also going to be able to affect positive change in all these other ways. So I've been trying to harness that as empowerment. So when I feel like, I want to give up, or I feel like I don't have a reason to, keep going for this or that, to say I can play a role in something greater than myself. So it gives the individual so much more power by recognizing that it's embedded sort of in the whole, that it is the whole, it's the individual, but there's something really beautiful and something very motivating about it when I can harness that. But that's what I love so much about it. But to say that you do have to, in order to reclaim your individuality, you're going to have to step into responsibility, I think, is something that I want people to know.
The only bit I want to add to what you've just said, because it's beautifully said, I agree with all of it, it's beautiful, empowerment, I love that. I mean, I'm so much like, you've just been at the retreat, and the thing I want to do, when I started doing the retreats, my aim was, how can I help people experience this oneness that I touch? Now, it's not that at all. Now it's like, how can I help them experience the oneness so they go home as empowered individuals?
Exactly. It's so
it's
different.
all about, like, get this so you can come out as you, feeling like... So I agree with you completely. The one bit I want to say, in the spirit of that kind of the conversation is, you said, but it can be a burden, and people definitely feel that. And now, maybe it's getting older, I want to say, yeah, it's a fucking burden. You're going to pick it up or not?
Exactly.
That's your burden.
Right.
Your burden is your life.
Yeah.
And all the people you love, they're your burden. You've got to carry them sometimes, but they will carry you sometimes. Are you up for it? Are you human enough to do this? Or, can you find the courage necessary in such a fearful world? Can you, and maybe you can't sometimes, and that's understandable, and I can't. And sometimes we need to just sit down and hold each other's hand and go, it's tough, isn't it? But ultimately, pick up the burden, because that's the meaning.
Yeah.
And that's what will make your life worthwhile.
Right.
Is your willingness to go, this is heavy, but I'm going to carry this because this is my life.
Yeah.
And I think there's something beautiful.
There is. It's very noble and it's very tragic, though, I think, we agree, to see how the message actually from my earlier days was drop the burden of being somebody.
Yeah.
Drop the burden of your life, right? The burden of the quotation marks.
Yeah. Whereas it now feels like, and this is perhaps a way of capturing it, is I feel more and more forthright about, no, go for it. Not even just accept it.
Yeah.
Actually seek it. That's how I feel. I feel like, take it on.
Exactly.
It's like,
and learn from it and grow from it.
If you're not able to carry the burden, don't do it, and carry a lesser burden. But as you get stronger, and I feel that, I feel like oh, Tim, you've had a really lucky life. You should be carrying more. Yeah. And if I can, I will, because that's how we move it. But also to see that everyone's doing that.
Right.
And that
we're doing
quote
it
that
together.
I think I mentioned from Philo Judaeus in Israel a long time ago, going, be kind to everyone, because everyone's carrying a heavy burden.
Exactly.
And the burden they're carrying is themselves in relationship with their universe.
Yeah.
That's the burden.
And that's the difference, So carry the burden, don't drop the burden.
Yeah, I think so. If you can, and put it down when you need to,
and
have a little rest, and then have another go.
Yeah, I think we can carry it much better with a narrative like unividuality.
Yeah, and be willing to let people help you with it.
Exactly.
And to help each other with it.
To help each other.
And to realise that some of it's stuff we have to carry together, because we are living communities. And we're not.
We can only carry them together.
Atoms. And the same with the transformation. Some of the transformation we have to do together. And the great thing that I think, I don't know, my vision is it will happen. Or my optimism is it will happen. In fact, I think it's happening. How quickly, I don't know. But that I think more and more and more people, even in little ways, are picking up on what I call this benevolence, this universal benevolence. I meet so many essentially good people. That doesn't mean if you treat them badly, you won't get and that's kind of right. It's like, but underneath it, there is still a genuinely wishing well. I think there's a real desire to let everyone be themselves now. We've had enough of being told how to be, and a real acceptance, widespread. I mean, still a long way to go, but unlike anything ever in history.
Right.
Remotely.
Right.
And so I think this is growing.
But we don't want to go so far into the individuality that we lose the universality, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's the other way around. I really think we never had it. I don't think we've ever had the universality. I think it was always unconscious. We've arisen from that. We find the universality now finally through the individuality, because by being individuals we become conscious enough, we develop as individuals enough that we can be conscious of something, not just like, oh, people are my people, but those people who aren't my people, they're people. Or what matters is my food, what matters is all forms of life. That expanding out, the whole of history has been, morality in history has primarily been love and care for those within the community.
Right.
And fuck over the rest.
That's true.
That's been history. And the ones that can do that best, because you need internal consistency, like with the body needs to work together, but it wants to eat that one.
Yeah.
Same with communities. It's like you work well together inside, so that's why people have been able to do outrageous things to each other, slave each other, because they're not the people. We're the people. They're just other things. But what's happened in our lifetimes is that's got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until a huge number of people have that essentially unividual insight, which is, oh no, we can care for all people.
Right.
And because they don't look like us, or they're not part of our culture, or not our tribe, there's something bigger of which we're all a part.
Right.
That's a big vision.
And it's celebrating differences
and then
within the
universal.
Yeah,
that's right. And that's historically, on the levels we've got it now, a very new phenomenon.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's growing.
I hope so. I think that you were saying the other day how things are actually a lot better than they used to be in so many different ways. And one thing that I'm thinking about a lot lately with COVID and everything that's happening in the world and divisive politics, it seems like there's, and you've described this a lot, this kind of spiritual crisis that's, I don't know how long you would say that's been going on for, because I'm not a historian, but that there's a real need right now for spirituality. And what I see happening is that people are reaching for these sort of modern, accessible versions of non-duality. So I have this really big fear that people looking for meaning are going to be turning towards these spiritual narratives that do offer them more of an escape rather than a way to, as we're saying, to kind of engage with, whether you want to call it the burden or the responsibility or the human condition, that now is a very sort of critical time.
Yes.
For people to discover something like unividuality and uniduality.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it's not. I mean, I don't mean that we had something and then we all lost it. It's like we had religious mythology,
right?
And we all agreed, by and large.
Yeah.
And so as a community, we had a certainty. Never quite worked, but it was enough to get you through. Then that collapsed, and we have this incredible birth of science and being able to look at things evidentially and a much more reasonable, rational approach to things, which originally came from that,
right,
and then eventually dismantled that, and has left us in this world now where we've got all the advantages of that, like the internet and video and houses and jumpers and everything, but what we haven't got generally is that idea of there is more than there's more than matter and biology, which in my humble opinion there most definitely is. We're cut off from soul. So there is a crisis. There's a soul crisis, which is arising as people are realising that. And part of the reason that we're realising that is also that by and large we're well fed. Yeah. So if you wake up every day and it's like, I don't want to be eaten and I need to eat, there's not a lot of time to be thinking about that stuff. But if you're not,
right,
then eventually you get what you've got in the world and it starts feeling empty. Because why is it feeling empty? You're not experiencing the more emergent levels of reality.
Yeah, that's true.
And I share certainly it was a big impulse for me of wanting to go, look, we need a new spirituality and it's not this non-duality.
Exactly.
But the optimistic thing I think, and I think you agree with me on this, is that actually, certainly since I was going to, when I went to when I spoke at a first non-dual science and non-duality conference, I was the only person there talking about the importance of the individual.
Yeah, I can't imagine what that was like.
The only one.
You were like a heretic.
Oh, totally. I just, the view was, I think, Tim Freke, he just doesn't get it.
Exactly.
He just doesn't get it.
He's
talking about the same thing,
enough.
but he's too attached to the self, and he hasn't really got it.
And I probably would have felt the same thing.
Yeah. But the last few times I've been, actually, I think, interesting though, even when I spoke the first time, the very first time, which I arrived there kind of by accident really, and was given this lovely venue to speak in, my feeling was that the other teachers all thought, oh, yeah, he hasn't got a clue.
Right.
But the audience came with me. They really came with me.
They must have been so confused too.
They were like, I really like this.
Right.
I really like this. And so they were, I always felt at those conferences that the audience was far more awake than the teachers.
100%.
And the teachers were kind of wrapped up in something which they got stuck in. And the audience was like way ahead. But I think the teachers have caught up, some of them. Because when I see it now, many people have been through exactly the same transformation and the transition that I've been through, and you've been
exactly.
through. They're not. Some of them may be stuck and not moving anywhere, but lots of them are on a journey.
Yeah.
And so what seemed really clear and obvious then,
exactly,
hang on.
Which is natural.
And I know so many people who've been through it as a phase.
Right.
And as a phase, it's really quite healthy.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if because I have the sense that it is changing and it is moving more towards the both and.
I think so.
But I'm curious if, in terms of, you talk a lot about temporal depth, which I love, and I don't have it as much as you do because you're older than me. You have more passivity.
Yeah.
But I'm curious if the reason why that might be happening is because, when was it around when, let's say, Eastern wisdom was coming into the West in droves?
Well, again, it's coming bit by bit by bit, but the big moments,
like non-duality, let's say.
Well, Eastern stuff, I'd say primarily 50s and 60s, and then non-duality was much later, I think, 90s even.
Yeah. It seems like as the process matures in individuals, they start to they go completely individual, completely dual, to totally non-dual, to no individual, and then it seems later stage, depending how long for different people, they start to realize, wait a second.
Well, we were talking about, do you remember the other night at dinner, about the 10 bull journey? And that might be a good way of capturing this.
Yeah.
That you have this tradition in the Zen tradition, where originally it was 8 bulls, and it's all the Zen circles, those lovely circles they do, and with a little picture inside.
Yeah.
So no teaching, it's just a picture. But if you understand the picture, it's an initiatory journey.
Yeah.
And the initiation is of someone who's got the bull, but the bull's wild, and that's the self. So it's the animal self. You've pushed, and this is where the idea that you need to tame your ego comes from, and it's a good idea.
Right.
We do it with all kids.
Need to.
It's like, don't just take everyone else's biscuits, or be nice to your sister, or it's like this is all about taming your own. Tell the truth.
Yeah.
And, think of other people,
right?
Not just yourself. Oh, you're so selfish. All these things you need to learn. If you learn them successfully, off you go. If you don't, you turn into a criminal, and it's really or a very difficult person.
Sure.
So the spiritual, and I think in history, I think people have stayed like that far more into adulthood than we do.
Yeah.
Because they were before us. And so there was much more down on the individual self in the animal self, for good reason. You're driven by sexual desire and, horrendous things that can happen from that. Once that's under control, that feels a bit repressive. But when it's not under control, it's like, hey, repress that.
Right. It's all about balance.
That's no bad thing to repress if it's leading to rape and violence. And, hey, whoa. But once it's not, it's like, relax, it's okay. And so that's been our lifetimes. It's been like, stop being so uptight about it. It's okay now.
Yeah.
So the 8 bulls, the first bull, was tame the bull, which is this instinctive self. So it goes from all these adventures, and eventually the guy's riding home on the bull. He's tamed the bull. It's the same thing you get in the Christian tradition, the Jewish mystical tradition. There it's a donkey.
Okay.
With the donkey in Egyptian is Set. It's the devil. It's like you tame the donkey.
Right.
They have donkeys, not bulls, obviously. And then the last, the 8th Zen thing is eventually you go through all these things and it's empty. There's nothing in it.
Right.
And that's the no self. It's like you've made the journey, you've tamed the self, you find the no self. And that is an ancient initiatory path which you find in Gnosticism, and the ancient pagan mysteries are the ones I know the best. And I think you and I have both described going on that journey.
Yeah.
You first you wake up to spirituality. It's all about changing yourself. Then you wake up from the self. That feels like a waste of time and an illusion. And then you've seen this. And then at some point in the evolution of Buddhism, somebody added 2 more circles.
Clever person.
Yeah. And the last one is beautiful in particular, because in the last one it's a guy coming back to the marketplace.
Right, down the mountain.
So he's come down the mountain, he's got his bottle of wine, he's not even a monk, he's got a bottle of wine, he's got a stick, and he's back in the marketplace, he's back in the world.
Right.
And that's that whole, in the Zen thing of, when you, before Zen, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers.
Yep.
And then in the Zen experience, mountains aren't mountains and rivers aren't rivers.
Yep.
And then after the Zen experience, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers.
Exactly.
And it's that coming back. And what I see in the initiatory process as it evolved was that addition. Mm-hmm. And so that you can see it happening in all the ones I mentioned. So that what we're really describing is, making this journey.
Right.
But because we have no new conscious initiatory path to follow, no one's there the whole time going, right now you're at this level.
Exactly.
Do that.
Exactly.
Jessica, right now I'd like you to concentrate on no self. We'll move on from that. But for a while, just spend some time meditating on what is that presence where
exactly.
you're like, I'll do that. And then when you're ready, I'll tell you the next thing.
Right.
Because I'm older and wiser and all this.
Exactly.
We don't have that.
Right.
So you wander into this and
and you're taught that let's say intermediary phase is the destination, right?
Exactly.
And that's, I think, what I try to explain to people that have been through what I've been through, is that the ego death is a phase of returning, coming down from the mountain with an expanded view to then live in the marketplace.
In the Christian mythology, the self dies on the cross.
Right.
And comes back in the flesh. In the flesh.
In the flesh.
That's a key idea there. It doesn't just ascend, it comes back in the flesh. So it's coming back in. So it does lead to a death, because that's
that's metamorphosis.
Yeah. I mean, personally, even now, if I had to invent a new tradition, I wouldn't symbolize it by a man being tortured to death.
Hopefully not.
It's like that's got that same kind of slightly dark.
Of course.
We've moved on from that thing.
Sure.
But nevertheless, in the Egyptian tradition, they would take donkeys up a tower and throw them into the ground. It's like that seemed like a good symbol.
Yeah.
It's like, no, let's leave the donkeys.
No animal sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly. We don't need to. Kill the bull. The whole Mithraism was you killed the bull.
Now we kill ourselves.
And then in Christianity, it became you kill your body. And now we don't need to think of those images.
I agree. But the rebirth is what's missing, right?
But the rebirth is the resurrection. And the word resurrect is in the Greek, it also means wake up.
Yeah.
You come back. You're
Exactly.
reborn.
Exactly.
You come back to life.
And that's what I think your retreats do for a lot of people. It's the resurrection.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Good. Well, it's been a delight for you coming over from Israel to the retreat.
Yes, and I hope to be back.
And it's been lovely to be able to film this conversation.
It has been amazing.
With Rupert Truman, who is sitting there behind the camera.
Thank you.
Who also made the wonderful What is Life movies, from which this is an extension. And
we
my
also have
gorgeous wife Debbie, who's looking after the
Deb.
sound and making sure we don't...
And providing endless cups of tea.
And got some tea in my kitchen in Glastonbury. And if you're interested in the retreats we're running, check out my website, because we'll probably do more. And we're doing them in Glastonbury, in my home now, because it's very sweet to invite you into my home and have that experience.
Absolutely. Thank you.